If you properly clean your bike and prep it for winter, it will survive the salt that can lead to corrosion and rust damage. Products like ACF-50, XCP Rust Blocker, Scottoiler FS 365 and TechCote ACS TC200 are popular among riders, but how good are they really? Let's test it. First of all, and as usual, I need to stress that this test is completely independent. The benefit of this video channel to us is as a marketing tool to raise awareness of Bennett's and Bike Social. We're not a shop promoting products we want to sell, we don't have any affiliate links, and nobody is offering us any incentive to favour their product. We do have a rewards platform that gives our members hundreds of great discounts, opportunities and competitions, but anything featured on there is in no way linked to any reviews. For this test, I cut a load of fresh steel plates, obviously this one isn't fresh, to size and folded them in the middle to 90 degrees to provide vertical and horizontal surfaces. I thoroughly cleaned them with isopropyl alcohol, let them dry, then coat them with each product as per the manufacturer's instructions before leaving them for 24 hours. And the plates were held in this crate, which was kept in my insulated shed with a heater and sprayed twice a day with a 5% road salt solution from this bottle. Every weekend, they were each thoroughly hosed off with clean water, and this is a lot slower than the standard salt spray test, which is done in a sealed container, but the idea is that it represents someone riding to and from work every day, then giving their bike a quick wash off at the weekend. This is actually the second time I've done this test, and you can see the first video up here, but I always intended this to be a repeatable experiment. Now, I included ACF-50, TechCote, XCP Rust Blocker and WD-40 Original in this second test, and the results on those control plates were within just days of what I got 3 years ago, so it did work. So first let's take a look at what we already know from that first test. Now, this time lapse covers the 7 months it took to get the results, and you can see that while ACF-50 performed better than Motorex Motor Protect, WD-40 and GT85, there were better performers. Motorex and GT85 both saw 20% rust in less than a week, while WD-40 Original lasted 2 weeks. Sprayed out an aerosol can, ACF-50 went 5 weeks before 20% of the plate was rusty, but only 3 weeks when it was painted on using a compressor and paint gun. And this is original WD-40, not the specialist corrosion protectant, and also GT85 isn't sold as a corrosion inhibitor. But everything I've tested is what people are using to protect their bikes based on feedback in the comments and on our Facebook page. Muc-off's motorcycle protectant also didn't really protect against rust, reaching 20% in less than a week. After the first video was released, they asked me to include a statement in the comments, but as this is an updated video, I'll read it out at the end. Valvoline Multispray actually did okay compared to ACF-50, but it was the other corrosion protectants that showed the biggest benefit. Now first let's look at Scottoiler's FS 365. It's an odd one in this test as it's meant to be a quick wash and corrosion inhibitor combined, so it's water based and meant for people riding every day who'll give their bike a quick spray when they get home. I tested it using 2 methods. One was to spray it on once, then leave it. The other was to reapply every evening after the second spray with a salt solution. On the sprayed once plate, it soon washed away, only managing 1 week before the metal plate was 20% covered in rust and 4 weeks before it was completely covered. But spraying it every evening, it went 12 weeks before there was 20% rust, and then it didn't go beyond 50%. Now, of course, the other products would likely do better if they were topped up daily, but you really need to wash the bike down first. If you ride every day throughout winter, ideally you'd give the bike a hose off every night, but if you don't have easy access to a tap when you get home, FS 365 might be an option worth considering. Though I'd still suggest the brakes are rinsed with water as much as possible, especially if you have old TechCote 6-pots. So as you can see, XCP Rust Blocker and TechCote ACS TC200 both gave outstanding performance. When applied from the aerosol can, XCP was at 50% rust coverage when I stopped the test after 7 months, and TechCote was at 80%. But look how long they take to show any corrosion. It took 19 weeks for TechCote to get to 20% and 25 weeks for XCP Rust Blocker to reach the same point. And you can see that applying XCP with a compressor and paint gun wasn't as effective, and that was the case with ACF-50 too. But if you have the kit and the time, you really can get the protectants to reach right up into the most hidden areas. Applied this way, XCP Rust Blocker still lasted 13 weeks before 20% coverage and 21 weeks before the plate was completely rusted. SDoc 100's corrosion protectant came in just behind the XCP and TechCote products, taking 10 weeks to get to 20% rust and 16 weeks to 100% from one application. So now let's look at the time lapse of the second test. The main thing here is XCP has released a new product, Clear Coat, and while the performance is reduced for this lighter coating, it still did 9 weeks before the plate was 20% covered in rust and 21 weeks until it was totally covered. Because it's so light, you can also apply it with a spray bottle, and there it took 8 weeks before 20% and 18 weeks before 100%. It's the same time with the compressor before the first 20% is rusty, though it was totally covered after 14 weeks. And these results still beat all but SDoc 100's corrosion protectant, TechCote, and XCP's own rust blocker for rust protection with one spray. Keep in mind the way it goes on a lot more cleaning. This is impressive. Ammo 308 didn't do so well, only lasting 2 weeks before the plate was 20% rusty and 6 weeks before it was covered. Now this surprised me, so I actually ran this one through the test twice. AC90 was flagged as something people use, but as it lasted just a week before there was 20% rust and 4 weeks before it was covered, I replaced that with a second plate for ammo and got the same result. Yes, olive oil, because someone on Facebook reckoned that was what they use. And as you can see, it's not worth bothering with. In the first test, I also tried engine oil, and unsurprisingly, that was hopeless too. And this one was a product whose manufacturer decided they no longer wanted to be in our tests before the results were in. It was doing quite well, but wasn't the best, and I haven't carried out the material safety testing that I did with all the others. With both tests completed, check out this graph and you'll see clearly the performance differences. The thick bars represent the weeks until 20% of the plates were covered with rust, while the thin lines show the time until 100% coverage. If you watch the cleaners test, which you can find up here, you'll know just how important material safety can be when some products have the potential to strip anodizing or crack the plastic used on your bike. And I have actually re-edited that video and included some new products and some more advice. So even if you think you've seen it, check it out, because actually that is a new version. Now I left samples of painted steel, anodized aluminium, ABS plastic, polycarbonate, acrylic and chain O-rings in all of these rust proofers for 2 weeks to ensure material compatibility. Now sure, they're intended to provide a protective barrier against corrosion on metals, but it's almost impossible to apply them without getting them on the rest of the bike. Even if it's wiped away, it'll be coating the inside of the bodywork and many other parts of the bike. So I drilled 2.5mm holes with a pillar drill for consistency in all the samples of the 3 different plastics. Then carefully inserted stainless steel M3 self-tapping screws to create stress risers that highlight any incompatibilities between the material and the chemical. And I need to say a big thanks to the companies that supplied those sample materials. Thanks to Evotech Performance, manufacturers of motorcycle parts and accessories who used their UK factory to cut the samples of steel. Thanks to accident repair specialist 4th Dimension for painting the steel samples. Thanks to Skid Marks for supplying the samples of acrylic, which are offcuts from the production of their excellent aftermarket screens. Thanks to trail and adventure parts manufacturer Rally Raid Products for supplying the aerosol lids used as sample dishes from their sister company, Mazplast Mouldings. Thanks to aftermarket and performance parts specialist B&C Express for supplying the chain O-rings. And after all that, the good news is that none of the corrosion protectants or multi-sprays that I sampled caused any noticeable harm to any of the materials used on motorcycles. You can use these without worries, unlike some of those cleaners. Hopefully it goes without saying that all of these products must be kept away from your brake calipers, pads, discs and tyres. Don't get them on the brake disc carriers either, as centripetal force will throw them out onto the disc surface. Before we decide which of these products are the most recommended, let's look at how sticky they are. I cleaned flat steel plates with isopropyl alcohol, let them dry, then coated them with the products before leaving them again for 24 hours. Each plate was then coated with fine sand, shaken to dislodge any excess, then rinsed with a hose. And in this chart, the sand retention is rated from 0 to 5, with 5 being the most sand left on the plate. XCP Clear Coat was released as a response to some people finding the original rust blocker to be a bit sticky, and after a ride it can hang on to some fine road grip that obviously this will depend very much on how heavily it's applied, and it's worth pointing out that it doesn't need to go on too thick. But putting it on with the compressor does give a cleaner look, and obviously parts of the engine can be wiped down, which still leaves a layer of protection. The new XCP Clear Coat shrugged off the fine sand well, especially after it was rinsed. But keep in mind that all of these results are ballpark figures only, as I don't have the kit to weigh samples before and after with enough accuracy. Now, ACF-50 is less sticky than many of its competitors thanks to the fact that it stays more liquid, which is potentially why it doesn't appear to offer quite the same longevity. So, from this testing, based on their ability to prevent corrosion with just one application, the following products are my choices for recommended rust proofers. XCP Rust Blocker, applied with a compressor and paint gun. TechCote ACS TC200. XCP Rust Blocker Aerosol Can. XCP Clear Coat Aerosol Can. XCP Clear Coat with a paint gun and compressor. XCP Clear Coat Spray Bottle. Bulldog BDX01. ACF-50 from an aerosol can. SDoc 100 Corrosion Protectant. And Bulldog BDX01 was one of the big surprises, given that it's a multi-purpose spray. To have outperformed ACF-50 that was applied in a light coat with a compressor is very impressive, but keep in mind I'm only testing it as a corrosion protectant and haven't assessed its lubricity performance. If it's used solely for rust inhibiting, there are cheaper and more effective products. Now, what about value? As you can see from this chart, there's a big spread in the cost of these products per litre. But you should also take into account how thickly you apply them, how often, and whether they're a multi-purpose spray, in which case they might offer you increased value. But it's been out of the scope of my testing to look at lubrication performance, and this is a test that's purely trying to find the best way to stop your motorbike from going rusty. While you may be reapplying them after washing your bike, unless you're carrying out an extremely thorough clean and application every time, there will be nooks and crannies that don't always get reached. So personally, I think it's worth opting for a product that gives the best possible long-term protection. The Best Buy products have to offer good rust protection, be easy to apply, and be good value. So here they are. TechCote ACS TC200, XCP Clear Coat Spray Bottle, XCP Rust Blocker with a paint gun and compressor, XCP Rust Blocker Aerosol Can. TechCote ACS TC200 offers excellent performance at a relatively good price. The only thing it's lacking over its Best Buy rivals is the ability to buy it in a liquid form to apply with a compressor, as its chemistry means it flashes off once it's out of the can. XCP Clear Coat is easy to apply from the spray bottle and hangs on to no more grit after rinsing than TechCote. It can also be poured straight into a paint gun's pot and applied with a compressor. Clear Coat in an aerosol can is extremely easy to use and only missed out on a Best Buy as the bottle is better value. If you don't mind paying a little bit extra and won't want to apply it with a compressor, it's worth the money. XCP Rust Blocker is a superb product when applied with a compressor and offers excellent value for money. If you have access to the equipment, I'd highly recommend it, as the way it mists means it reaches right up under the tank and other inaccessible areas. And while TechCote provided better protection in my test than Rust Blocker through a compressor, the fact that it can more effectively reach into the smallest nooks and crannies mustn't be overlooked. XCP Rust Blocker from a can is the stickiest and most expensive of the 4 Best Buys, but there can be no doubt that it offers by far the best rust protection of anything I've tested. Before you use any rust inhibitor, it's important to get your bike thoroughly clean. Also, while many brands claim good water dispersing properties, you'll get far better results if you dry the bike thoroughly. Now, I use a Brawl dryer, but again, check out the cleaners test video. In there, you'll find out how to clean and dry your bike in 3 easy steps, as well as the cleaning products you really must avoid. So check that out in the link up there or in the description. Then it's simply a case of spraying the product onto all the metal surfaces, avoiding the brakes and tyres. And remember, don't put any of them on the brake disc carriers, as centripetal force will carry them onto the braking surfaces. Avoid any overspray on matte painted surfaces, as it creates a kind of a patchy look. You can clean this off, of course, but check out the cleaner's review for more matte paint care advice, which that was something that wasn't in the original one. Using a compressor doesn't need to be complicated. I got a Clark Panther air compressor for my birthday about 10 years ago, though sadly I broke it making this video, so I'm trying to order some new parts for it. Quick tip, always wait for the VAT-free days at Machine Mart by signing up for their mailing list or asking to be added when you're in the shop. Now, I've just got this basic Clark paint gun which costs £19.19, and it gives a much better mist than a paraffin spray gun like this. Both XCP Rust Blocker and ACF-50 pass through this gun without any problems, and that is the original Rust Blocker. The Clear Coat obviously goes through it fine too. If you're using ACF-50 out of the aerosol can, it can be pretty reluctant to spray well on a cold day, so keep it indoors for a while before you use it, or put it in some warm water just to get some warmth into it. Finally, most of the corrosion protectants here benefit from a quick wipe down with a clean microfiber cloth to remove any excess from exposed surfaces. But use that same cloth on unpainted matte plastic and they'll typically come up with a really lovely deep black sheen. And I keep the cloth I use for this in a plastic bag, so it's already well saturated. Personally, for most of my cleaning, I now use XCP Clear Coat and aerosol, but on a once a year deep clean, I will run it through the compressor. But I also use XCP Rust Blocker in a can to spray onto steel frame tubes of my bikes, or when I have the whole wheel out on my Grom, for instance, which has a cheap steel box section swing arm. So I jet Rust Blocker into there whenever I work on the rear brakes or change the tyres. Now for this, it is worth splashing out £2.95 on this aerosol extension lance from XCP, because you can jet that right in deep on stuff. And you know, especially on frame tubes, a lot of classic style bikes might have a steel tubular frame with sometimes with open ends. Just get some of this down there. It's just giving you that protection. How often you have to put these on your bike will depend on their performance, but also how regularly you clean it. My testing shows that the best products resist hosing well, and I'd expect them to be pretty resilient against a neutral pH foam or shampoo. But anyone riding in the worst weather will probably be cleaning their bikes more frequently and with more powerful degreasers or bike washes. So I suggest giving your machine a quick once over after every wash with these sprays, because you don't need to use a lot and they really do go a long way. I should point out with a compressor as well, while you pour a lot of the bottle into the pot to get it to kind of siphon up, you barely use any. It lasts ages. This isn't an exhaustive list of corrosion protectants, but it does cover the most popular that were available at the time of testing. As soon as possible, I'll carry out another test, which will include the new muc-off HCB1, which was released just as I completed this one. There'll also be WD-40's Specialist Corrosion Inhibitor and Lanogard's Motorbike Complete Care Kit. If there are any other products you'd like me to include in a future test, please let me know in the comments below. There are plenty of corrosion inhibitors out there that promise months or even years of protection, but my testing indicates that, at least for a regular winter rider who keeps their bike clean, this might not be the case. Motorcycles are hard to keep looking at their best because there are so many chassis and engine parts always exposed. Crawl under any car and you'll notice that while they might look good on the top, it's a different story on the bits you can't see. In my opinion, that means it's worth spending the money on something that offers good protection for as long as possible. Despite describing it as an ideal winter protectant, muc-off asked me to include this comment after the poor performance of its motorcycle protectant after the previous video. Muc-off motorcycle protectant is not intended as a standalone dedicated corrosion protectant. It is formulated to protect your motorcycle by dispersing any remaining moisture after a thorough clean and removal of other corrosive substrates. The product therefore is not designed for the type of use seen in this test, which intends to replicate a motorcycle being ridden through winter. Ultimately, no protectant will ever be a replacement for the appropriate level of care, and it is only this, combined with the correct products, that will help you enjoy your motorcycle all year round. Now hopefully the testing I've done here will help you to find the products that do offer some really excellent protection, whether your bike's laid up for the winter or used every day. It was released too late to be included here, but I will be testing muc-off's new harsh condition barrier HCB1 as soon as I can.